Okay, maybe I'll go ahead and start. So welcome everyone. At UBC and from my heart, we acknowledge that the UBC Point Grey campus is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And my home, where I'm currently working, is also on this unceded territory. And I feel privileged and grateful to be here. Because we're scattered at the moment, you might be calling in from the traditional territories of other peoples. And we invite you to learn more about the traditional territory you might be on by visiting native-land.ca. My name is Janet Worker, and I'm a University Killam Professor and Canada Research Chair in Developmental Psychology. Most importantly, for today's event, I'm also one of the co-directors of UBC's Language Sciences Institute, and we're thrilled to be sponsoring this event, and you'll hear more about that. For accessibility reasons, I'm going to describe my physical appearance. I'm wearing like a black t-shirt and a jacket. I have graying, very short black hair and glasses that are currently sitting on my head. And behind me is the roof peak of my attic study that I love. We've sent around the respectful space statement and posted it in the chat. And so I thank you in advance for your help in making this a safe learning space. Please note, we are recording this event and ask that you do not record this event. Thank you. And if you would prefer not to be recorded, just turn off your video and microphone. And please type your questions as they come up during this presentation during this event into the chat. So it's my absolute pleasure to be the MC for this launch today, this launch of the ABCs of language development, Discover Language with Your Child. This book was written for parents, caregivers, educators, and anyone who supports families and children. And the book provides incredible cutting-edge research findings, and they are accurate. And wonderful how-to practical strategies to support the communication and language development of all children. And it's organized, as you'll hear, in this really accessible ABC format. It was produced by KidCare Canada and co-written by Dr. Carla Hudson-Cam, Canada Research Chair in Language Acquisition, Caitlin Bittman, a speech-language pathologist, Estelle Paget, the founder of KidCare Canada, and Elizabeth Welburn, also associated with KidCare Canada. And I'll tell you a little bit more about each of them in a moment. And with Estelle's retirement, and thus the closure of KidCare Canada at the end of last year, UBC Language Sciences has taken over distribution and copyright of this book. But we're so thrilled that Estelle is still helping us with this launch. And in this launch, authors will discuss how to use the book, what the situation is in BC re-language development for children, and services that are available. They'll discuss as well the companion document and the science behind the book. And then at the end of their presentations, I'll outline briefly how you can get the book, and we'll have a Q&A session before our prize draw for a free copy, and we'll finish up around 2:20 or so. So I'm going to introduce all four of the speakers right now at the beginning so we can move through this more smoothly. So take some notes so you'll remember who and what these wonderful people are. So Estelle Paget was the founder and executive director of KidCare Canada Society, a registered charity that was focused on social and emotional development in infants and young children. An incredibly impactful society. And for almost 30 years, Estelle taught in universities in France and Canada and designed and led university-wide programs based on her background in linguistics, second language acquisition, international education, and pedagogy, and informed by cognitive science. So Estelle Paget is the lead author of ABCs for New Parents, the last book that was published by Kid Care Canada. Elizabeth Welburn has an MA in educational psychology from UBC and a background in research and instructional design. She worked with Kid Care Canada from 2015, and prior to that worked for or taught at several post-secondary institutions in BC, including Royal Roads University and the University of Victoria. And as is quite evident in the book, she also spent 15 years with the Ministry of Education, focusing mainly on curriculum design and the role of technology in K-12 education. You'll then hear from Caitlin Bittman, who is a registered speech language I think you'll next hear from Carla Hudson-Cam, who is a professor of linguistics and was a Canada Research Chair in Language Acquisition from 2010 to 2020 at University of British Columbia. Dr. Carla Hudson-Cam studies first and second language learning, focusing on the relationship between what learners hear and see, and the learning, what learners learn about language. She has a background in brain and cognitive sciences, linguistics, and developmental psychology. So she brings an interdisciplinary and very knowledgeable perspective to the work. And I think I have the order right. The last person you'll hear from is Caitlin Bittman, who's a registered, and if I don't, you'll see, speech language pathologist in Victoria, BC. And Caitlin has extensive experience in public health and private practice settings, working with preschool-aged children and their families to diagnose and treat a wide variety of communication needs. And through everyday routines and playful interactions, Caitlin builds capacity in both parents and children to expand children's communication skills and enhance their overall development. So without further ado, I'll hand this over to Estelle and Elizabeth.
Thank you, Janet. So it is a joy and a privilege to be with so many who care about families and language development in children. Language is arguably our most important human attribute. These are the words of Dr. Janet Worker in the foreword of the ABCs of Language Development. Being able to use a language enables us to communicate. Being able to communicate in its myriad ways enables us to form and maintain relationships, key to having a meaningful and happy life. There are everyday things that a caregiver, a teacher, a health provider, a librarian, a family support worker can do that will benefit all aspects of a child's development and the child's ability to communicate throughout life. Yet how many of us are educated in language acquisition? How many of us know those magic ingredients that encourage an infant, a toddler, a school-age child, a teenager, or even an adult to communicate, and why these work? The second part of this book is called Discover Language with Your Child, and in it you will find answers to those questions and so much more. This book enables everyone to support the language development of a child they interact with. It does this in an integrated way that Elizabeth, Caitlin, and Carla are going to expand upon. And as Janet mentioned, it includes the science, practical strategies, pre-literacy skills, and of course, because it was designed by Kid Care Canada, social and emotional development. So we cannot guarantee that the approaches included in this book are going to open up the lines of communication between teens and their parents. But actually, the philosophy and techniques included in this book are similar for humans of all ages, starting with the first moments of life. So we hope that you will enjoy this book for many years to come. Thanks.
how should this book be used? Well, the beautiful thing is it's easy to use. There's no wrong way. You can read it just from the beginning to the end, and that's, perfectly acceptable. But there's many other ways that you can use this book as well. It is an ABC, and that means there is a topic for each letter of the alphabet. So you could just, pick a letter at random, read it through, work on that for a few days, and with your child or the children that are involved in your life. You can focus on just the science, which would be the blue sections. We've organized this book so that there is a distinction between sections that are to do with science and those that are more practical. And each letter of the alphabet, so each topic, has got a science section and a practical section, and it's color coded so that it's very easy to understand which part you're in. And that's another way to look through things. The book has works with stages of language development, and those are also numbered and color coded. So particularly in the practical sections, if you're looking for a particular developmental stage that you want to focus on, you can just look for the color coding or the number of the dots that relate to practical ideas for exactly that stage. There's an index at the back of the book, and there's a table of contents, and there's a glossary. So again, there's many ways you could just find something in the glossary that's of interest to you, or in the index, and look it up that way. So we have many, many ways. The book has a lot of repetition of key concepts throughout, particularly the social and emotional things. So key messages are reinforced throughout the book. And the book, as you may know from something that you've seen on the web, but I can just flip through here a bit. There's tons of photos in the book and beautiful illustrations by our designer, Sari. And it's actually a book you could have a child on your lap, and I've done it. I'm a grandma, so that's of a little guy who's just coming up to 6 months. So that's my proud moment, and I just have to mention it. He is getting very interested in books already, and which if we will talk about that in the book, you'll see it, how you can use books with children. We can look at the pictures together and really enjoy ourselves. So definitely no wrong way to use the book. Next slide for Estelle. Estelle? Did we lose her? Or?
Hi, you didn't lose me, but I just thought we were going to go straight through. All right.
I think this is your slide.
So yes, it will help parents feel more confident about their parenting. It will give more children a good start to life, and it will help fill the gaps for educators, health professionals, and others who support families.
So next slide, which is mine. Okay, this book is for everyone. So we were thinking of parents, caregivers, support people, people who have any concerns related to language development in young children. We see this book as a springboard. The letters illustrate, we have things within each section to illustrate what's typical for different stages of development. And a caregiver might want to know if their child is meeting developmental milestones or not. This is a book that can help you with that. We have an underlying philosophy, and that is that everybody needs help sometimes, and help is available. And when we get to Katie's section, you'll probably hear a little bit in this session about how help is available in BC. There's sections in particular are D for delay and W, when to seek help, in the book. So that's just sort of a little heads up. And now we can segue to Carla, who will talk about some of the science. And next slide.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I'm Carla. I'm really happy to be here with you today to help introduce this new resource. I'm going to share with you a little bit about how language scientists think about language and what we know about language learning and development that has really influenced what's in the book. So language is an amazing human ability. From our earliest utterances, where an utterance is just any single complete thing that we say, be it a word or a sentence, we use language to communicate our needs and our wants, our thoughts, our feelings, our hopes for the future. We can comment on the state of the world, and we can ask questions about things that we want to know. But to be able to do these things, we need to learn the language or languages that are used around us in our environment. But what does that mean? What is language? Next slide, please. So this is a formal definition that I might give to students. So language is a shared system of symbolic communication that has emerged naturally within a group of interacting people. Notice a few things about this definition. One, it's for communication. Two, it's symbolic. What does that mean? Well, that means that the words and other bits with meaning don't directly mean what they mean. They're somewhat arbitrary associations between a form and a meaning. So the word dog, for instance, in English doesn't have to mean dog. It could mean something completely different. And in other languages, the words for dog are quite different, and they're just as good at meaning dog as the English word dog. This is quite different than a point, where a point really embodies something about its communicative value. Whatever you're pointing at is what you're talking about. And then there's the emerged naturally within a group of people. So to be a real language, it can't be invented, and it's shared, meaning it has to be learned. Notice there's no mention here of speech, and that's because languages can be spoken or they can be signed, and they're equally good as human languages. So hopefully this definition gives you a feel for how language scientists think about language, and also gives you at least a little bit of sense of how complicated language really is, at least as a concept. But that just scratches the surface and doesn't get it into what children actually do, what they have to learn when they're learning a language. Next slide, please. Probably the most obvious thing that children learn is the words in their language. Words are consistent pairings between a form, the sequence of sounds in a spoken language, or the sign in a sign language, and a meaning. So what does learning words involve? Well, first you have to figure out what the words are. You probably feel like words are separated from each other by little silences, like the spaces between written words on a page. But that's actually not the case. Sounds run together, and ignoring the big silences between sentences, or where we have a bit of trouble and have to restart and things, the silences that do occur are actually more likely to be inside a word than between words. So in a word like bicker, that has a tiny little silence in the middle of it. They also have to figure out how to produce, say, or sign the word, and that's also a difficult task that takes many children years to master. And then there's the meaning part. Figuring out what a word means is not straightforward, and how children do this, what kind of information they use to infer or figure out a word's meaning, is actually quite different for different kinds of words. For example, for many concrete nouns, objects, words like bottle or doggy, the meaning is present in the environment when the parent says it. It can be seen, it can be felt when the word is used, but other words don't work like this. So to figure out what something like love or hungry mean is more difficult and is actually quite a different process. Next slide, please. But learning a language involves more than just learning words. It also involves learning the parts of words and the systems or patterns those words and parts of words participate in. So we have to learn what sounds our language uses. So take the sound at the start of the word pot, for example. If you learned English as a child, then you likely think that it's the same sound as the second sound in the word spot, S-P-O-T. But it's actually not. The P in pot and the P in spot are actually quite different. You've just learned to treat them as if they're the same. In some languages, these two sounds are in different categories, and you can change the meaning of the word by substituting one for the other, just as you can in English by changing a P to a B, so pat versus bat. They also have to learn how sounds can be combined. So for instance, SP, that particular sequence of sounds, can occur at the beginning and at the ends of words in English. So for instance, spot and wasp are perfectly legitimate English words. But PS in that order can only occur at the end of words and not at the beginning. So you can have taps, but you can't have sat in English. This is an English constraint. And in other languages, PS at the beginning is just fine. So children have to learn which sounds their language includes, which ones are grouped together, and how they're allowed to combine them to make words. They also have to learn about morphology or word pieces. Many words have internal structure where different parts of the word each have their own meaning. And children have to learn what these bits called morphemes are, how they work within the system of words in their language, and how they sound different on different words. So for instance, they have to learn that the S at the end of the word cats, C-A-T-S, is something that isn't part of the main word. It gets added and it carries its own meaning, plural, one cat, two cats. It can also be added to other words. So it's not just about cat, it's about nouns. So you can add it to bike and produce bikes. So it's part of a system. And they also have to learn that that same morpheme, that plural morpheme, sounds a bit different on different words. So for instance, on the word dog, it's not dogs, it's dogs, but it's the same morpheme. It just sounds different. And of course, there's sentences. So they have to learn what order words go in. You can say big car, but you can't say car big, unless you, of course, you say the car is big. So you can put those two words in that relative position with respect to each other. So they have to learn different orders of words. They have to learn different kinds of sentences. So the difference between questions and statements, for instance, and how different kinds of sentences are related to each other. So questions have really some interesting properties that differ by language that have to do with the relationship between a statement and a question. So in English, to turn the car is big into a question, you have to say, is the car big? Basically swapping the position of is and car, but you don't have to do that in all languages. Next slide, please. But that's not all children have to learn. There's a lot more. They also have to learn how to use the language, how to tell a story, how to have a conversation, how to talk to people in different situations. And they have to learn how through all of these different aspects of language, we can actually communicate information about our social selves, about how we see ourselves fitting into the context. It's not just about the ideas that we're trying to get across. These are much more subtle things that are not just about the language itself. They're about the culture that we and the language exist in. So learning a language involves learning an awful lot of different things all at the same time. Next slide, please. So many people think that language learning is so natural that all children will learn everything easily and pretty much no matter their environment. But this isn't entirely true. Yes, humans are amazing language learners, and we even learn about the languages in our environment. Yeah. And if we're in a bilingual environment, we can learn about multiple languages in our environment before we are born. But the amount and kind of languages exposed to definitely does have an impact on learning. And next, I'm going to talk about two examples, concrete examples of input affecting learning. So next slide, please. Starting with infant-directed speech, or what we call IDS. Pretend you're holding a baby in your arms. Everybody do this. Look them in the eye and talk to them. You go ahead, everyone's muted. No one's going to hear what you're saying. You might feel a little ridiculous, but just humor me here. When you did this, if you did this, you probably smiled, you probably raised your pitch, and your pitch likely varied. That is, went higher and lower, a lot more than when you speak to an adult. This is classic IDS, or infant-directed speech. It's the very familiar sing-songy way that we often speak to infants. It's almost universal. Even sign languages have versions of it, although the specifics of IDS do vary from culture to culture. Some people think that IDS is harmful to children's language development, but it turns out that that's wrong. It's really good for babies' language development. It serves a few different roles. One, it attracts their attention. So they pay attention to the sounds, and very likely also to the faces producing the sounds. So looking at a face producing sounds helps them distinguish different sounds from each other, especially ones that are highly confusable in the sound signal, because they can use the visual information in the face to help them distinguish some sounds. And attending to the sounds, paying attention, means more information is processed, and so it's learned better. And it also puts them in a very happy mood, and so more ready to learn. There's another feature of IDS that's so implicit that it's really easy to overlook completely, but is really important. And that is that it's almost always what we call contingent, which just means that it's produced in response to the child's own actions and vocalizations. It's dependent on an interaction with the child. The child smiles and we talk back to them. They burp and we say something else. They flap their arms because they're excited and we respond. And it turns out that this contingency in IDS is super important for learning. So for instance, research shows that infants can learn new sounds from IDS that's directed at them, but not from IDS that they overhear. So IDS produced for some other baby is not contingent to the baby who's listening. That baby doesn't learn from the IDS. It has to be IDS directed at them. And studies with infants learning to babble show that contingent IDS encourages children to babble instead of making sounds like ooh and ah, something we call cooing. Now, babbling, of course, is important practice for the muscles used in talking. So IDS helps children learn in more ways than one, and it's not just about how it sounds or how it looks in the case of infant-directed sign. So it's not that's important for supporting learning. It's about using language that's in tune with the child at that moment in time. The ways parents talk to children also affect children's learning of word meanings. I'm going to start by giving you a feel for the way researchers have thought about the problem of word learning for a long time. So imagine you're in a room you've never been in before with lots of objects that are unfamiliar to you, many of which are doing actions that you've never seen before. And a person you don't know enters the room and speaks to you in a language you don't understand. Even if that person only says a single word, how do you figure out what that word means? There are so many possibilities. And researchers long thought that the possibilities were so overwhelming that the child must bring some specialized, innate, language-specific constraints that would help guide their inference, to help them figure out what words mean. And this way of thinking about word learning takes input out of the picture because it's about what's internal to the child and not what the child's actually getting in terms of input. But this notion of learning, of the learning problem, actually seems to be more about adults' imaginations or lack thereof than the child's own learning challenges. It turns out that children's experiences with the world are really not as we adults imagine them to be, meaning that the task of word learning is not what we had assumed. First of all, they tend not to see the whole space in the way that we do. So if you think about it, babies are closer to the ground than we are, which means that a lot of the things that we think are in their field of view, because they're in our field of view, are not really in the children's field of view. They can hold up their heads to look at it, but that's not what they tend to be seeing. And there's other differences too. So think about a baby physically. They have these really short arms. So when they're holding on to something and looking at it, it takes up much more of their visual field, space in their visual field than the same object would in ours, where we can hold it out and it's here. They hold something here and it's right in front of their face and that's all they're seeing. So their physical attributes actually affect what they're experiencing and what they're paying attention to. And they really reduce the complexity of the learning problem. And they do make use of this as learners. It turns out that the early stages of word learning, in the early stages of word learning, infants learn labels much better when we label the thing they are paying attention to than when we label something else, even if we try and draw their attention to the novel thing. So parents who talk about the things their child are interested in and paying attention to have children who learn more words earlier. But beyond that, just talking to your child a lot helps them learn words. And here variety is important. It's not about walking around labeling things all the time or repeating the same words over and over. It's about talking with your child, not at them, engaging them and having them participate in a conversation as best as they can at that point. This really interactive way of talking with children is what helps their language development. And one reason that it helps is likely the fact that when parents engage in these richer conversations with their children, even before the child understands much language, they actually provide the child with more information about the word forms and what they mean. So if you say, look at the kitty over and over, the boundaries between the words aren't clear. Remember I said we feel like there's these little pauses between words, but there aren't. If you hear, look at the kitty, look at the kitty, look at the kitty, and you don't know what the words are, it sounds like one really long word. But if you instead say, look, a kitty, it's playing with a string. Kitties like to play with strings. They also like to drink milk. You like to drink milk too, don't you? Do you want to pet the kitty? It's soft, isn't it? You've said kitty after the words and the, so you've provided a little variation in terms of what kitties occurring around. You have used the singular form, kitty, and the plural, kitties. You've told the child something about kittens that might help them figure out what the thing in the context is that is the kitty. It's the thing that's playing with string. You've linked something about kitties to something about the child. They both like to drink milk. And you've invited the child to interact with and experience the kitty physically, which will make the whole episode more memorable for them. Moreover, you've said something about kitties that isn't visible in the context, the bit about liking milk. You've given the child information about the world that they couldn't see for themselves in that moment. And through all of this, you've said a lot of different words. So this kind of talking, we actually know supports word learning in all sorts of ways. And an almost automatic side effect of this way of talking with children is that it also expands their knowledge base. Children who are spoken with this way don't just learn language better, they learn more about the world around them in the process. And this kind of conversation can be about anything, daily routines like cooking and shopping, special family occasions and events, anything that's relevant to the child and their family. So children who are engaged in this kind of talk are provided with a much richer early experience all around. So these two examples were about specific relationships between input and learning, and they show that exactly what kind of input or the language the child hears, sees, or feels is best for learning differs according to what aspect of the language or language use you're thinking about and how much the child already knows. But they also highlight some generalizations that talk to children that is child-centric, that is targeted at their level and their interests, taking into account their abilities at that time, and includes engagement with the child, produces the best learning outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay. But why should we care about best learning outcomes? Why should we care about what helps children learn a certain aspect of language faster? Well, first of all, it's not just about one aspect of language. It turns out that children who hone in on the sounds their language uses, so for instance, a child learning English who figures out that the P in spot should be treated as if it's the same as the P in pot. Children who figure out these things earlier have larger noun vocabularies earlier on. And children who know more nouns early on discover patterns in how words label things earlier. And so they're better able to learn more and more nouns more quickly. And knowing more nouns makes it easier for you to learn what verbs mean. So if you know what the words cat and dog mean, and you see a cat chasing a dog, you see that event, and you hear the cat is chasing the dog, you can use what you know, the cat and the dog, to figure out what chase means. So the differences that we see early on have knock-on consequences all the way down the line. And the differences between the children with rich language environments and other children just gets bigger and bigger over time. It's very much a rich get richer kind of situation. Second, and for me, I think this is the most important, it's not just about language and language development. Language skills impact social skills and the ability to interact in social situations. And this is a really big deal. It's harder to engage in friendships, even as a child, when your language skills aren't up to the same level as your peers. And children with poorer language skills are more likely to be identified as having behavioral issues, which isn't surprising because they don't have the same ability to express themselves using language, so they're going to act out more. Oral or sign language abilities early on are highly predictive of reading ability and how easy it is to learn to read. They're also highly predictive of math ability, which may seem kind of odd, but it's really that language provides a scaffolding for all these other abilities. It provides a way of structuring thought that makes abstract concepts like numbers easier for children to grasp. And that means that you understand more of what is said in school, you understand it faster. There's some work, for instance, showing that children who understand words more quickly when they're infants and young toddlers, if you say, look at the dog and look at how quickly they look at a dog, the infants who are faster do better in high school. The quicker you understand something, the less time you spend figuring out what someone's saying, so you're more likely to catch everything. And the language you're exposed to also affects how much you understand about other people. Studies show that exposure to certain kinds of sentences is really important for understanding that people can have thoughts and desires, and that these thoughts can be different from reality, and they can be different from what we ourselves think. These are skills that are often called theory of mind. So language exposure is not just important for learning language, it's important for learning all kinds of other things. So hopefully I've managed to convey to you at least a small sense of how complex language is, how much children have to learn, and how important language skills are for all children. But I don't want to leave you with the impression that the path to learning is hard for children or caregivers. Children really are amazing language learners, and if they're given input that provides the right kind of language, they will learn it. And importantly, the right kind of input doesn't involve drills or teaching. It just involves talking to children that are in ways that are sensitive to the child. And sensitive involve interactions that are good for the child in other ways. So showing the child they're important, worth our time and attention, interactions that help build strong relationships and are centered around teaching the child things about their family, their community, and their culture. Which brings me to a few final points. So next slide, please. So parents should talk to their child in the language or languages that they feel most comfortable in. So it's not about using a particular language, it's about using your language, things that you feel at ease in. Exposure to multiple languages is not a problem, even for children who have a cognitive or language disorder. So children can handle being exposed to multiple languages. The kinds of interactions that are best for learning language are also the ones that help children gain knowledge of the world around them and the culture in which they're embedded. And perhaps most important, the kind of interactions that are best for learning language are also good for a child's social and emotional development. So it's about helping all kids get the best chance at learning language, but you're also providing them with the best chance in a lot of other areas of their development as well. So just as a parting thought, I think language is a gift that's deceptively easy to give our children, and it has all sorts of wonderful effects in other areas of their lives. We just have to realize how they learn best. And this book was written to help support all caregivers, support all of the children in their lives on that learning journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. So I'm Caitlin Bittman. I'm a speech language pathologist, or SLP, since speech language pathologist is such a mouthful. And so I'm going to speak to you today about speech and language services in British Columbia, and as well as the companion document that we created, My Child Needs Extra Communication Support. And I hope to answer some of these questions for you today. So how many children in British Columbia need support? Well, the generally accepted prevalence rate among SLPs and researchers is about 10% of children have speech, language, and communication challenges, though this number does vary a little bit depending on the source, but around 10%. So this is some population information that I pulled from Stats Canada's most recent census in 2016. Really looking forward to the 2021 version. So it is a little dated, but still this really demonstrates that there are a large number of children who require speech and language intervention, about 69,000 in British Columbia. And how do we meet their needs? Well, with speech language pathologists. So SLPs, we've created or completed, pardon me, a 2 to 3 year master's program, and we are a regulated profession. So some programs in British Columbia also use communication health assistants as well to meet the needs of children that they serve. So communication health assistants vary in their education and training. Some have had formal training at a post-secondary institution, and some have on-the-job training. But the thing that's consistent is that they are supervised by the speech language pathologist. And how many SLPs are there in BC? Well, about 25 speech language pathologists for every 100,000 people. So now that 100,000 total is the total population. It's not just children. It includes adults and children, and those with and without communication needs. It also includes all SLPs, so speech language pathologists who work with children and those who work with adults. So trying to decipher exactly how many SLPs we have to meet the needs of children is actually a very hard number to pin down. But really what the take home point here is that there are a lot of people in BC and very few speech language pathologists to meet their communication needs. So in British Columbia, we do have publicly funded services for speech and language, and publicly funded meaning that there's no out-of-pocket expense to the family. So for preschool age children, publicly funded SLP services are most often located at the local health units or through child development centers. And they're funded through the Ministry of Health and through the Ministry of Children and Family Development. For school age children, publicly funded services are provided by the school system. So their SLPs are funded through the Ministry of Education. And then, of course, for all age ranges, there are also many speech language pathologists working in private practice. And those families or those SLPs generally work with a large range of ages. And for families who access private practice services, they pay through either third-party insurance or out of pocket. So in terms of access to SLP services, well, it really does vary quite a bit by region. For publicly funded services, first, the referral process, it can be pretty different between the different regions. So for example, for preschool age children who receive services through the health units or the child development centers, some of those places might require a referral from a healthcare professional for a speech and language evaluation. So through a public health nurse or a family physician. Whereas other programs may have an open referral policy, meaning that parents can just call up and refer their own children. For children in the school system, SLPs SLPs might complete classroom screenings to identify children who may have some additional communication needs. Or teachers might be the one who identifies a need, and then they would submit a referral for a speech and language evaluation. Next, the wait times. Wait times can really vary quite a lot between different regions and agencies, and it really depends on the population size, the funding, and also the total number of SLPs available. And then services offered between the different regions might also be quite different. So for example, some regions may offer parent training courses, some might provide mostly consultative services only. Some might offer individual sessions direct with the speech language pathologist and the child. Some might use communication health assistance. Really, the services vary widely, and it depends on the program and the needs of the population. And then, of course, the availability of private practice speech language pathologists changes depending on where you live and the number of speech language pathologists in that area as well. In terms of identifying a need for support, well, often parents are the first ones who identify that their child might not be developing as expected, but it's also very common for professionals who have lots of experience with or education about expected communication milestones to identify a need. So for example, a common referral source is public health nurses at the 18-month immunization appointments, or for older children, preschool or classroom teachers. So these professionals will generally know about the referral process and about services available in the area for a child's age, and they will be a key player in getting the ball rolling for an evaluation with a speech language pathologist. And if you're a parent with concerns, a good first step is talking with your primary care provider, a family physician, a public health nurse, nurse practitioner. They will have some knowledge about the next steps. And if a child is preschool aged, parents and caregivers might also consider just calling the local health unit for more information about accessing services in their area. If a child is school aged, parents and caregivers can talk to the child's classroom teacher or principal about their concerns and what services might look like in the school. Bottom line, whether it's a parent or a professional who first has questions about a child's communication development, it's best to seek out a speech language evaluation when you first have concerns. We SLPs are not very big fans of the wait and see approach. We much prefer, when in doubt, check it out, especially since there will likely be a wait several months long for an assessment. It is much better to start the process early on than to wait and see and then wish you had started earlier. So enter the ABCs of Language Development companion document. Well, we created this document to help the estimated 69,000 children in BC who require speech and language support. So it's written for their parents or any caregiver of children with suspected or confirmed communication differences or delays. So a caregiver could mean a parent, grandparent, preschooler, daycare worker, babysitters, really anyone who spends time with a child. The companion document covers a lot of information. We discuss a large range of communication needs, such as receptive and expressive language, speech sounds, fluency or stuttering, voice, social communication. We give information about what all these different domains are, and we talk about possible indicators of a delay in each of these areas. So this is also a really great resource for parents or professional who aren't quite sure whether their child needs a little bit of extra help. And then for each domain, they're filled with practical strategies, ideas, and examples that parents can use to support their children if there is a suspected or confirmed delay. So all of the strategies are organized by the type of difficulty, and we include information about why the strategies may help. But I really want to highlight here that caregivers don't need to wait until a professional confirms a communication delay to use this document. And this document can be used with all children, not just those with a confirmed or suspected delay. So in fact, all of the strategies discussed in the book and in the companion document help to create an environment that is enriched for language learning, whether a child has a communication delay or is typically developing. So yes, the companion document is great for parents or caregivers who have concerns about their child's development, but it's also great for parents of children who are developing typically, who just want a few more ideas of ways they can support their children in achieving optimal communication development. And I also want to highlight that while this does not replace the companion document, while it does not replace the need and the importance of an evaluation with a speech language pathologist, I do really love this resource because it's a great tool that can be provided to parents who aren't sure if they have concerns about their child's development and they need a little bit more information, or for parents who are concerned but they're waiting for their assessment with a speech language pathologist. For parents who have a confirmed, for parents of children who have a confirmed communication delay, their SLP is likely going to or already has provided them with some strategies specific to their child's needs. And actually, they'll probably find a lot of those strategies in the companion document. For those parents, this is still a really great summary, and it might even have some additional ideas or examples that they find helpful. And then parents of children with an identified need might also want to provide it to other people in their family who care for the child. So for example, I recently gave the link to the companion document to a family with whom I've been working for quite a long while. And the feedback from mom was, you know what, this is all of the things summarized that we've talked about. And it's so wonderful because now I have something that I can give to grandma. He's with her 3 days a week and now grandma knows what to do as well. I've tried to communicate it to her, but now I have something physical. And so she found it quite helpful. And the companion document, it can also be used by professionals. So healthcare professionals like physicians, public health nurses, even other SLPs, or other community professionals as well, like social workers, daycare, preschool, classroom teachers, babysitters, librarians, etc. This resource will provide them with some additional information about when a referral might be indicated. And then for professionals who spend a great deal of time with a child who has a suspected or confirmed communication delay, they will find strategies in there that they can use to best support the child while the child is in their care. It's also a resource that I hope professionals would consider distributing to parents. So any professional who monitors child development, it's a really great thing that they could provide to parents before there are concerns. And then any professional who refers for a speech and language evaluation, this companion document would be an excellent resource to provide to parents at the same time as they submit the referral. So as parents, it can be very, very difficult for them to hear that their child may not be developing as expected, and then that there's quite a long wait for an assessment. This document can provide them with some practical strategies while they wait for their evaluation and more specific support. And it also provides information about speech language pathologists in general and what parents can expect at their appointments, which can be quite comforting as well. So really, we hope that this tool will be useful for caregivers of all children, whether there are delays or whether the child is developing as expected. And any caregiver with questions, concerns about how their child's communication is developing, and a tool for healthcare and community professionals to help educate professionals, and so that professionals can help empower parents while they wait for additional, more specific support for their child. So ultimately, we see our ABC's book and our companion document together. They're tools for prevention, enrichment, and intervention. For prevention, if we can get these documents into the hands of parents before children show signs of a delay, or in the hands of parents of children who might be at risk for developing a communication delay, for example, if there's a family history, this tool will help them create rich environments to help their children thrive early on, and can give the parents ideas and strategies about how to best support their children's communication development right from the start. So kind of like an upstream intervention, intervening before there are any difficulties at all. For enrichment, well, both resources provide strategies for general enrichment for children who are developing as expected to promote optimal communication development. And then lastly, for children who are experiencing a delay or difference in their communication, it's an intervention tool. The companion document in particular, it's something that caregivers can use to support their child who needs some extra help. Thank you.
Thank you all. Wonderful presentation. I always learn listening from you guys, even though this is my research area. I just loved it. So a little bit from me, and some of you have started putting questions in the chat. Please feel free to go ahead and do that, and or you can just pipe up, I think. The book is $27.95 plus shipping through Crown Publishing. And I think that Alex is putting the link in the chat. Language Sciences is not for profit at all. And so any revenue will go towards new print runs, et cetera, so that we can print additional copies to get into the hands of those who need it, who might not be able to afford it. I must say that I personally have bought a box of 15 for starters at full retail. And I'm giving them as gifts to people who have new babies. So I gave one to our gardener because they were having a new baby. Well, our gardener, he comes and trims the trees once a year, and they were so grateful. And I gave one to a young lawyer down the block, and she also was so grateful. It's accessible for everyone. As I said, we want this book in the hands of those who need it. So we're more than happy to work with organizations and families on pricing and have discounted pricing available. So you can email us at language.sciences@ubc.ca, and Alex has probably put that in there too. She has. We'll organize this for you. But for starters, we have discounted pricing of basically the cost, $10 per book, available for municipalities, universities, hospitals, schools. And if your organization receives funding from a municipal, regional, provincial, and/or federal source, you may qualify to become a customer of Crown Publishing and can access this pricing. And again, Alex is posting more information. So I think that's it. I just want to now invite more questions from you.